Hi there, my name's James. Welcome to the first What I'm Reading video. I'm reluctant to do any kind of book reviews because I'm absolutely no authority and have very little training other than that I've read quite a lot of books. But I'm more interested to think about what I'm reading and how one first receives a book. What are the first impressions, and how is your opinion of it changing as you go through it? So I thought it'd be quite cool to do like a what are you reading this month kind of thing. And it'd be really good if anyone ever comes across this to find out about what you're reading and what your thoughts are as you encounter these books, and also just to get the word out there about books that I think are really interesting. So I've done a few practice runs of this in my little flat in London. And this is going to be the first one I intend to publish. As you can see, I'm not in London at the minute. I'm currently in Greece, in somewhere called the Mani Peninsula, and right on the south tip of the Peloponnese in the it's technically the second most southerly point in mainland Europe. But if you ever come here, seriously, this place resembles Mars. The most southerly point on mainland Europe is Gibraltar, and that's more like the Isle of Wight. I think this place counts as the most southerly just because of its isolation. So when I was picking about what I was going to bring along on this holiday, the obvious choice was to bring Patrick Leigh Fermor's Mani. It's a really cliched choice, and those of us who care about books and language, we should all try and avoid cliche. As Martin Amis talked about a war on cliche. Well, yeah, but I was going to bring this, wasn't I? I mean, come on, like who would bring like Frederick Forsyth or Marion Keyes? Like, what the fuck is wrong with people? Like, you'd bring this book. This book I've read a few times, so it's not my first time encountering it, but it's been a long time since I read it, and I'm receiving it again as new and reading it within the context of the landscape. And I think that's an interesting way to think about the way Fermor approaches his travel writing. If you've ever read any of it, you can sometimes, at least I can sometimes get lost as to where he actually is, because the journey kind of strings along these incredibly ornate episodes of history and folklore, or just incredibly vivid descriptions of where he is. And that's what this is like in Mani. It's talking about this very isolated, mysterious place, and where life is hard and life is challenging. One of the last true wildernesses in Europe, and that's why he was attracted here. I mention this because if you've ever read any Fermor, you've probably read From the Woods to the Water, or Time of Gifts, and what was the last one? The Broken Road, which he never finished. And those are very different from this book. Those are the ones which he's most famous for. A Time of Gifts is a man in middle age reflecting about his travels as an 18-year-old. So it's as much about an older person thinking about what it was like to be young, as well as remembering a Europe that no longer exists anymore. So for those of you who don't know, he did this epic walk across Europe in 1933. He goes through, it's the early days of Nazi Germany, and then they end up fighting in the war. So it's a book as much about memory as it is about travel. Whereas this book, and which was written in his journey was 1951, this one was written in 1958, or published in 1958, and it has a companion called Romelli, which is about northern Greece, which came out in the 60s. And it followed The Violins of St. Jack's, I believe, which is about travels around the Caribbean. They're very different from the most famous Fermor books because they're more like, the more he did a journey, then he wrote about it. He's working from notebooks and quite recent memories. So it has a different, although it's very much Fermor, it's more akin to a travelogue than a guy reflecting on his life, essentially. And I would regard it as to compare them is a bit unfair, because From the Woods to the Water and Time of Gifts, they're different books than what this is, and this is really extraordinary and really amazing. So check it out. And as a little souvenir, I've picked myself up a Greek edition. I won't be able to read this at all. I just thought it was a cool souvenir. I am trying, and it will help me do a little bit of practice. But yeah, there you go. So yeah, check it out in the English if that's your language, or check it out in the Greek if you're Greek. So the second book I brought with me was a book of poetry. I'm keen on my poetry. I'm always amazed that we don't read more poetry. Everyone talks about us having, short attention spans. Poetry's great. It's really short. You don't have to dedicate a lot, which when it comes to dedicating time, I'll show you my third book in a second. So this is a book called Austerity Measures, and this is a collection of poetry that was produced in basically between the mid-2000s and the mid-2010s. Austerity measures alludes to the austerity crisis and the economic crisis in Greece, and it features established poetic voices as well as new poetic voices. It's a good thick tome. There's a big collection here of contemporary Greek poetry. The thing which impressed me most about this is the fact that it's even published at all. Getting Greek poetry in English, let alone getting it with parallel text, which is always recommended, particularly if you're trying to learn, is something which is really rare. We don't often read a lot of Greek poets. To see this published by Penguin in an accessible paperback is something really great to see for poetry in general, and for Greek poetry in particular. I am not too much into it yet, but I really like so far the wide variety, stylistically, as well as in terms of voices and who's writing. And it only occurred to me today that the name Austerity Measures is great, because poetry is an austerity measure, isn't it? It's about economy of words with the maximum of meaning. I hope that's what they were thinking when they picked that, because I think that's such an awesome title. I have read a few reviews of it, and like I said, I love the variety of styles in it. One of the reviews, I think, is by a guy called David Mason, who's a poet, American poet who was established in Greece. And this was a contemporary review. It said, it wouldn't count as canon, but that was then. Who knows? Maybe it will count as canon. It's extraordinary just to see that this thing's published in the first place. I'll give an update as I've read a bit more of that. Incredible book. Final one. Again, come to Greece, you got to read Greek writers. This is something which I have never read, but is Nikos Kazantzakis must be the most famous Greek novelist that there is. You'll have probably heard of Zorba the Greek, and this is The Last Temptation. You more likely be familiar with the Scorsese film Last Temptation of Christ, which was inspired by this book. I'm about 200 pages into this. This is a really extraordinary piece of work, and I have to preface this by saying, I'm quite a sacrilegious, atheistic kind of guy. I see why it caused such a fuss at the time. The main fuss is that because it presents Jesus as a human being, which is my understanding is what he's supposed to be. He's someone who struggles with temptation. He's someone who struggles with his realization of his fate and what he may be and what people may think he is. Like I said, I'm 200 pages into it, so don't give any spoilers as to how it ends. But reading it, the things which struck me is how Kazantzakis uses anachronism to incredible effect. He's writing about a pre-Christian world because Jesus is not yet Christ, but it's something which would be familiar to someone who has been produced by a Christian world, particularly in Greece. It features monasteries, monks and nuns and things like that. He's depicting the life of Christ within a landscape, socially and religiously, which would be familiar to many Christians, particularly Orthodox Christians. And again, even as someone who wouldn't really be bothered by anything which is sacrilegious, to allude to sex and temptation and things like that, you can see why in an intensely conservative society, or with any Christians, it would be very, very challenging. The other thing that really stood out for me as well, though, aside from the historical anachronism of it, is that it really is getting to it's really expressing some of the variety of early Christianity and one of the great theological debates and challenges that existed, because in this Christ as a man. And as I was reading it, it immediately made me think of these early Christian sects like Ebionites or Theodonites, I think they were called, for whom Jesus was fully human. And they had decided that he was adopted by God temporarily and given the power of miracles. He wasn't God himself. God conferred something on him. And this is contrasted with people called the Docetists, who thought he was this purely spiritual figure, that he didn't actually die, because if he's God, how can he be material and how can he be man? And all these massive fights that early Christianity had that we've completely forgotten about. And that is what gives the tension, a real tension to the character of Jesus in this book, is this debate about what is he? He doesn't know what he is. No one else quite knows what he is. And it's alluded in the Gospels. So, a Theodonite who might think he is all man, and something's been conferred on him. In Matthew's Gospel, he says, Jesus' last words are, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? As if something's been withdrawn. He's been given up. He's been abandoned. John's Gospel, he's like, oh yeah, into my hands, I confer my spirit. Like, he knows, he's in on it. That's Christianity trying to figure these things out. And what Kazantzakis does is he puts the disciples and Jesus in that context, not just of trying to figure themselves out theologically after the fact, but in their lives lived, trying to understand the time in which they are, and who they are, and what it all means. So yeah, great, incredibly controversial. Also written in 1955, he died in 58, and to be at least his certainly most famous work, I think, maybe aside from All of the Greek. It's great to see a writer at the end of a long life producing something like this. Anyway, so those are the books which I'm reading this month when I'm on this trip down into the Manny. Any future ones I do of this will not be in such an exotic location, but I hope you found that interesting and that you'll go and check out these books, because I'm really enjoying reading them. So yeah, take care.